Thank you so much, Michelle. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to stop and listen to us talk about the PSAT, SAT, and we're going to cover a little bit of the ACT, but really focusing on the PSAT, SAT, because that's going to be that's going to be the test that your students are most familiar with. So what's the difference between the SAT and the PSAT? Well, a good way to think of it is the PSAT is like the SAT's little brother. So essentially, it's the younger, smaller version of the SAT. So students take the PSAT so that way they get prepared for the SAT. It actually embeds and builds levels of questions. So let's say I'm a ninth grader. I'm not going to see 12th grade level SAT questions. I'm going to have some questions that are built on my content area as a ninth grader. So these are some questions that I should know as a ninth grade level student. And then as I learn more subjects, like let's say, I'm just learning Algebra 1, then in 10th grade, I, learn geometry. That's actually the flow of the PSAT. So it goes from like ninth grade to 10th grade to asking some more 10th grade level questions, and then all the way up to 11th and 12th grade, where it gets a little bit more specific on some higher level questions. Every October, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade students take the PSAT or SAT. 12th graders are going to take the SAT, and 10th and 11th graders are going to take the PSAT. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the why, the what, and the how. So the first thing is you're probably thinking, oh, great, here's another test, something else that we have to worry about for our students. But it's pretty important to take these tests seriously. One of the reasons why is because how you do on the SAT has real-world results. So every year, colleges use ACT and SAT scores to accept students into college. So they can also use this to determine the financial aid package, to determine scholarships, but I'll get into that a little bit later. But this is just kind of a quick example as to why you should take these tests seriously. And it's because it has an impact on what careers you could eventually have afterwards. So this chart, basically what it breaks down is that, the more education you have, the higher salary, right? Which is always a good thing. And then it also shows the less likely you are to get to be unemployed, right? So you can see that, somebody with less than a high school diploma is making about $30,000 a year, but then has, a 9% chance of getting laid off overall, right? Compared to somebody, let's say, with just a bachelor's degree, they have a higher earning potential. So annually, their averages for $74,300, and they have only a 3.5% chance of being unemployed. So the SAT is important and the ACT is important just because it means that it opens up more opportunities for your students, but then it also means that you just have a better chance of, earning a higher wage, keeping a job. So this is, again, just another example of why the test matters. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see ACT and SAT scores and then a student's GPA. So one thing that you may notice is that the higher your test scores are and the higher your GPA is, the better odds that you actually have is getting accepted to college, right? You can see that the lower it goes, the more likely the lower your GPA goes, or the lower your test score goes, the more likely you are to be waitlisted or denied from a university. So this is another important slide. So when we look at, 2-year versus 4-year versus public or versus private, a good way to think of that is, I may have a lower SAT score and I'm not worried because I'm just going to go to a community college, right? But if I work a little harder, try to get a little bit of a better ACT or SAT score, what that means is I just have more opportunities. And what it looks like is that I could go to a community college where maybe the graduation rate is 40%, or if I work a little bit harder, try a little bit harder on that ACT or SAT, that means that I could end up with a higher chance of graduating on time, right? For some 4-year public and private, 60 or 70%. So imagine if you had 100 students at a high school and you said only 40 of those students were actually going to graduate. That's not really great, right? But if you said, hey, 60 of the students are going to graduate or 70 students are going to graduate, also not great, but much better odds. So that's kind of the difference as to why, you should really look at the test overall, ACT or SAT, and kind of take them seriously, because it just means more opportunities and a better chance to get into different institutions with higher graduation rates. So this is just kind of a quick example to kind of show you, if you're not familiar with what, test score requirements look like across different campuses. For Texas, we have a lot of what's called automatic admission requirements. So what that means is they kind of lay it out at the beginning of the year, and they say, if your student has this, they are accepted. Or if has this GPA, has this test score, they are accepted. So if we look at the example of UTSA, what UTSA is saying is that if your student's in the top 10%, they'll be automatically accepted in their graduating class. So let's say there's 100 seniors at one high school. If your student has the highest GPA from 1 through 10 out of all the students at that high school, that means that your student falls within the top 10% of that graduating class for all the classes they've taken over 3 years. And I say 3 years because we actually go calculate off a rank based off of junior year grades. So if you look, you can see that if I could be in the top 10% of the class, I'm automatically accepted to all of these schools, right? And then there's some schools where they actually say if you're in the top 25% of the class. So that means if we have 100 students at a high school and the GPAs, the highest GPAs 1 through 25, those would be the top 25% of students will automatically be accepted to a university. The other thing that comes in important, that's important here is that let's say, I don't have that GPA. Well, I can actually have a good SAT score or ACT score to help me get accepted into that college. And you can see that, different universities, they have kind of a standard. Well, if you're in this range of the class, you need this test score. And the basic thing to kind of understand here is you kind of want to make sure that you meet those automatic admissions, right? So you want to make sure your students are having a good GPA, because that means overall that we have a better chance of getting accepted. Because as you can see, like let's pick this one. Oops, sorry. That the higher the SAT score, the lower the GPA, the actual higher SAT score that you would need as it goes down right here. So just something to kind of keep aware of is to make sure, and that's for A&M Corpus Christi, that the lower your GPA, the higher SAT score that you would need. So this is kind of the other thing that I kind of talked about before is it's good to get accepted to college, right? That's step one, right? Getting accepted into college. But then there's another whole other piece behind that, which is, potentially getting some scholarship money from my test scores. So some institutions, they actually have charts like this on their website where they say, you know what, if a student has this GPA, right, this grade point average, and this test score, they automatically get this amount of money per year, right? Some could say over 4 years. It just depends on the institution. Every school is going to be different, but this is kind of a breakdown to show you that the higher the GPA, the better your test score. Potentially, that means more scholarship money to help support your student while they're in school. So one thing I wanted to point out is this is kind of a good example to look at overall test scores, right? Why they're important. And you can see, and this is a good slide to say, I don't know where my student falls at, or this is a lot of information. Where do I kind of start? And on this chart, we actually lay out on the left-hand side here, your student's grade point average, whatever that is, what schools could they start to be looking at? So if I have a student who has a lower GPA, it doesn't really matter as much until we get up to the 20 ACT or 1030 SAT that they really are looking at, maybe a community college, right? Because right now they just really need to focus on getting that GPA to be better overall, right? And the same thing for some 4 years. So the second that my GPA starts or my test scores start going up, I can start looking at more 4 years. Same thing here on the right. The higher the GPA just means the more opportunities for different schools. So by the way, a lot of people ask us, is this exactly, why is UT Dallas better than SAM Houston or UTSA? It's just an overall graph. So If you see this like green coloring, it's kind of like where you're landing as a student, right? You're 4-year eligible compared to top tier college eligible, or tier 1 college eligible compared to 2-year college eligible. So this is just kind of a good way to stop and pause and say, like, where overall is my student landing, and what schools should they start to focus on. I know that this year especially has been a little different, and more colleges are going test optional. But right now, that's only a little over 300 colleges out of the 5,000 colleges in the United States. So although it is popular, it is something that's, we're keeping an eye on, and it does mean more opportunities for students. We really still need to take the ACT, SAT tests really. They're really important still, because some institutions could still require it, and then B, kind of like what we talked about before, it could affect scholarship dollars as well. The last thing I kind of wanted to point out is, overall, if you get nothing else out of this, I want you to remember that the better my students' ACT or SAT scores, it potentially is going to save me time and money. So we did some math, and what ends up happening is, if your student gets a certain SAT score, that means that they're college ready. So college ready basically means that they're ready to take college level classes. If a student tests below college ready, that means that they may have to take something called remedial classes. Typically, it's only community colleges that offer these remedial classes, and that actually means that they'll be spending more money in college. So when you're college ready, when you have a college ready test score, that means it saves you time and money. So if you did the bare minimum, got the lowest score possible, potentially you could end up taking 22 hours of college credits before you're ready to actually start your degree program. And same thing, overall, that means roughly $2,000 that you would have to spend before you could actually start taking classes towards a certificate, an associate's, or a bachelor's degree. So those are kind of some things just to kind of point out as to why this is important. It's just overall, it's saving you some time, saving you some money when you're in college. And this is just kind of another important piece to this, is that overall, these are just numbers, right? These numbers do not define you as a person or your student as a person. This is just one thing. Nobody has ever asked me, hey, Dustin, what was your SAT score when you were in high school? Once you're in college, or once you're out of college, nobody brings that up of what your ACT or SAT score. So this does not really define who you are as a person. It's just a barrier that we have to move past, a threshold that we have to get past in order to be successful in the next stage. And the last piece of advice, this is more for my students. The best SAT test takers do not take the exam, they dissect the exam. So what that means is really chunking it out to say, okay, let me see the questions that I can answer first. I'm going to focus on just these important ones that I know, and then I'm going to move on to the hard ones and spend some more time. So really taking your time, dissecting the exam, and not getting overwhelmed. And I'm actually going to pass it off to my co-presenter, Katie, who's going to tell us a little bit about what next steps actually, I got ahead of myself. One last thing. I got a little too excited there. The other thing that I kind of wanted to point out is when students will be testing. So this is really important. If we have any families out there or any parents of any junior students, class of 2020 kiddos, your students will actually be taking the ACT and SAT in March, right? There's a couple of different dates out there. Get with your campuses, get with your counselors, get with your campus testing coordinators to find out the exact dates, but roughly they're going to take the ACT and the SAT in March. Some students are currently taking the PSAT right now. 10th and 11th graders are taking it in October. If your student missed maybe the first test, get with your campus testing coordinator to find out exactly when they could retest. But then again, everybody's going to take every 11th grade student is going to take the ACT or the SAT in March. So this is just kind of an idea of when it's going to happen. And now I'll stop talking and I'll pass it over to my co-presenter, Katie, and she'll talk to you a little bit about how students can get prepared for the SAT.
Thank you, Dustin. I'm going to go over really briefly a tool called Khan Academy, which is our preferred way to study for the SAT because it's a super easy online way. So I'm just going to show my screen and then go over Khan Academy. Now, if you're not familiar with Khan Academy, it's a free online study tool for students so they can practice in and study for a variety of subjects, including the SAT. So Khan Academy does have a specific course where students can practice SAT questions and take full practice tests. So if your student does have a Khan Academy account or wants to create an account, they can log in and see their dashboard right here. And so this is from the student side, right? It'll be a learner's perspective. And so if they log in, they should be able to see on the bottom the SAT course if they're enrolled. And if they click on that, they'll be able to see in more detail what that looks like. And so as you can see, the first thing it asks you to do is choose a practice schedule. And so this can be really good, especially for students who are doing these things from home and working virtually, right? I know right now everything has been overwhelming and can be kind of hard to keep yourself accountable and stay on track. And so choosing a practice schedule is really important when it comes to keeping yourself on a good study schedule and making sure that you put in that time to study for the SAT. So students can choose whatever they like if they want to put in time every day, every week, whatever works for them and is convenient for them. As you can see, it also asks you to sign into College Board. And so the really cool thing about Khan Academy is that it works with College Board to look at your SAT scores, your PSAT scores, and it'll give you personalized study help. And so, for example, if you have someone who took the PSAT as a junior and is looking to take the SAT next, they can link their Khan Academy account with College Board. And from there, they can see, for example, the room for improvement based on their PSAT score. And we recommend usually at least 6 hours of study time because usually you see a jump in scores when it comes to studying for the SAT. So students who have taken the PSAT and then study on Khan Academy before the SAT at least 6 hours will see usually around a 40-point increase. And obviously the more you spend on Khan Academy, the better your chances for improving your score. And so I would just recommend that all students would sign into their College Board through Khan Academy and link those accounts. And as you can see, when you go to practice, you can see in a little more detail. And so it gives you options, right? So it gives you math, reading and writing. And then the essay portion where their service actually does give you essay feedback and ways to improve on your essay. And if you scroll down a little, you can see that it gets really specific in how it breaks down those sections. And so it can help you with specific topics. For example, if you're overall strong in math, but maybe you're not as strong at graphing linear equations, which I know I'm not, this is a really good way to narrow down and find the specific things that you could maybe grow on or improve on. And then up here, there's also a section for tips and strategies. So if your student is someone who maybe is more concerned about the format of the test itself, or they're worried about pacing themselves on the test, which I know is almost another component of the test, this can be really good because it gives you an overview of the skills, overview of the content, and it'll help you with time management. And then lastly, the full tests. And so you can do full practice tests for the SAT. And so as you can see here, there are a bunch of different practice tests. And so if you want to take multiple practice tests, this can be a good idea to sort of get an idea of what the pacing is like of what the test looks like, and you can do that from home. You can do that online on Khan Academy, or you can also do that by printing out a PDF version and doing that if you want to really simulate the experience of taking the test at home. And then that is mostly it. I'll say the big takeaways again are signing into College Board, linking your accounts to get that personalized study help, and then making sure that you put in time practicing. So choosing a practice schedule and making sure that you stick to it. And then I'll hand it back to Dustin.
Awesome. Thank you, Katie. I actually had a question when it comes to Khan Academy. So 6 hours every week that I have to practice to get 40 points or higher?
It's just 6 hours overall, right? So obviously if you do 6 hours a week, you would be even in better position, right? When it comes to SAT. So we recommend at least 6 hours total, but obviously if you have a schedule put in, right? If you're putting in hours every week, that can only improve your chances of improving your score.
So that means I just tested maybe as a junior or a sophomore, and I just found out my SAT, PSAT scores. So if I start like right now, let's say late October, all the way up until March, if I'm a junior, and within 6 hours, I got to find 6 hours within all those months and weeks just to practice, and you're saying my score will go up?
Yes, absolutely. I know it seems kind of overwhelming for students to think about studying on top of school, but when you think about how much time you have between tests, it can be completely manageable, right, to make time, even if you're only doing maybe 25 minutes a day or an hour a week, that time really adds up and it'll help you in the long run.
And this program, it costs what, $30, $100? How much?
Completely free, free to use, free to take any course you like. And so it's almost like getting an online tutor for free.
Wow, that's awesome. That's great. Thank you for sharing that with us. I think there's a couple of questions that we always get from parents and from students is just, it's always like, what can I do as a younger student? And this is allowed, ninth graders can sign up for this. Is that right?
So any student from any grade can sign up. And so they do just have SAT courses and SAT practice tests. But the cool thing is that since you mentioned the PSAT is like the little brother of the SAT, the format of the tests are pretty similar. And so they can check, for example, specific math topics or reading topics and start studying from there. So even if they're not quite to the point where they'll take the SAT, they can still put in study time and get prepared, even as a ninth grader.
Wow, that's awesome. So definitely Khan Academy. And I can check my students' progress, right? Like I can go in and actually sign up to make sure I can track their progress.
Yes, you can. Parents can use Khan Academy, even educators, if you have teachers that already have existing classes that your students can join. And so there are lots of ways to check students' progress. You'll be able to see on your side of things, right, as a parent, how many questions your student has answered, how many hours or minutes they're putting into those questions. And so you can really see a breakdown of that progress. And for an answer to the question about if tests are free, for the full practice tests, they are. Everything on Khan Academy is free. And so you just have that number of practice tests and you can take several of them if you're interested.
And that was actually a really good question in the chat. So, and the ones that are going to be the in-school ACT and the SAT, these ones that I showed earlier, and I'll pull them back up, those are also going to be free. So the district pays for your students to take an ACT or an SAT, but it's all free through the district. And then on top of that, if your students qualify for a fee waiver, they could also end up taking an out-of-school ACT or an SAT. I would recommend checking with your counselor, college-bound advisor, at your student's campus just to get a little bit more information on if they qualify for a fee waiver, so that way they can test multiple times, not just these dates on the calendar here. And it looks like we got another question. Yes, so parents will get the PSAT results or their students' SAT results through the campus. There's actually in October is when the students test. It takes them about till December to get the results. They'll actually mail a packet of SAT and PSAT results to the campus, but you can also check through their College Board account. If your students are already signed up with College Board or are already starting to use a Khan Academy and create a College Board account, they can log in to find out those results. And the same thing for ACT. If you go to act.org, or for ACT, and then for the SAT, it's College Board. But the other thing that I kind of wanted to point out is, who do I go to or where do I start? And by the way, this is a very flattering picture of me. Most of the time I don't look like this, so I apologize. But if you go to that URL, that tinyurl.com/College Hub 2020, that'll actually take you to a directory of all the counselors, college advisors throughout the district, so that way you can connect with your student's advisor and you can get information to your student and make sure that they're on track.